Hola, hello. I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. And in this episode of New Mexico History in 10 Minutes, I want to talk about casta or caste. Caste is a racially based system of organizing people and organizing society. And it's a way of trying to control people and control society. I want to talk about how the casta system of Spain impacted New Mexico during the period we were part of colonial Mexico, and then into the Mexican period, and then later. So we need to know about this system because it's very important to see how our ancestors interacted with each other and developed and evolved our culture that we have today. Spain, during the 700-year war with the Moors, who were Muslim and from North Africa, they were Berber, and the Jews of Spain, all these people interacted, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and the Spaniards developed a system during that medieval period of trying to organize their society, calling the Moors, for example, Moriscos, or a person who converted, a converso. These were ways of labeling people. By the time the Spanish come to the Americas, they have to do the same thing. Cortez and his soldiers, when they come to Mexico around 1519, out of the gate, they start to have babies with Native American women. At first, these babies were called Español because they were half Spanish. And this tradition goes back to the ancient Romans. The Romans, when they would conquer a place like North Africa or Spain, one of the ways they would incorporate the local population into the Roman system was by having babies with local women. So this is what the Spaniards did. And at first, it was not an issue. There were Spaniards and there were Native Americans. But soon, within 10, 20 years, that population of half Spanish and half Indian people started to swell and overtake the Spanish population, which was never as big as the Native American population. So what you start to see happen is this designation mestizo. Mestizo means half Indian and half Spanish. Well, this eventually will grow to be the biggest part of the population of colonial Mexico. Well, this is one thing. At first, the Spanish wanted to have a República Española, a Spanish Republic, and a República India, the Indians. But add to that, the Spanish were starting to bring Africans to the Americas as slaves and also as free people. But they are also an integral part of this greater population of New Spain, Nueva España, what we call now Mexico. What's interesting is by around the early 1600s in the church records, for example, at the cathedral in Mexico City, what you start to see are separate books for the different groupings. You see a book for españoles, baptisms, bautismos for españoles, and matrimonios, marriages for españoles, and then you see books for indios, marriages and baptisms. But all of a sudden, you start to see a book called castas, bautismos de castas, baptisms of castas, and matrimonios de castas, marriages of castas. And these are the people who make up the caste elements of the population. This is the mixed blood element, okay? And what's fascinating, this obsession with race, it's racial, it's racist, it's incredibly detailed. The Spanish develop about 18 or 19 variations of mixing between the various elements of humanity who are coming to Mexico City in the 1600s. So it's quite fascinating. At the top of this casta system were españoles, the español. This doesn't mean people from Spain or the American-born Spaniards. This means people who had essentially worked their way up the caste system to be designated as españoles. It's like the highest level of the caste system. You could be an español and have Native American ancestry. Spaniards from Spain didn't, and neither did criollos, the Creole elements of New Spain. But the Español was at the top. After that were castizos. These were people who were 3/4 Spanish and 1/4 Native American. Then you had a mestizo, half Indian, half Spanish. Then you had various mixtures of African and Indian, called lobo, or Spanish and African, mulatto. And it's very interesting as you get lower down into the caste system. It was very insulting. Animal terms, like I said, lobo were used. Coyote was a person who was kind of the opposite of a castizo. A coyote was a person who was 3/4 Native American and 1/4 Spanish. So you could see this is a way that the Spanish had of trying to control intermarrying, intermixing. Paintings in the 1700s show that people were supposed to look a certain way depending on how they were mixed, and they were supposed to dress a certain way as well. And there were strict laws. You could dress a certain way as an Español, clearly more European. You had to dress a certain way if you're castizo or mestizo or mulatto or indio. It was very strict, and there are cases of people getting in trouble for the crime of passing as a Spaniard. In other words, you were trying to pass yourself off as an Español even though you were mestizo. You could get in trouble in places like Mexico City or Puebla for doing this. So this is a system that was in place, and it could be maneuvered. Unlike the caste system in India, which was very strict and very rigid with a priestly class at the top, and then at the bottom you had the untouchables. In the Spanish system, it could be maneuvered sometimes within a lifetime or within a generation or two. For example, if a mestizo had a child with an Española, the child would be castizo. And then if the castizo had a child with an Española, that child would be Español. But there are cases where people are baptized mestizo, but because of their station in life, their work, or their how much money they made, or how good a Catholic they were, they could eventually be called a castizo or even an Español. So this is important because this system comes to New Mexico, especially in the 1700s. We don't know much about before 1680 because most of our documents were destroyed in the Pueblo Revolt. But New Mexico was definitely part of colonial Mexico starting in 1598. But in the 1700s, New Mexico is tightly and intimately connected, fiercely connected economically to places like Guadalupe del Paso, Juarez, and Parral in what's now Chihuahua, Mexico. Religiously, we were governed by the Bishop of Durango in Mexico, and politically, we were ruled from Mexico City by the Viceroy, the Virrey there. So we have to remember this. So these ideas are brought up to New Mexico, and we know because of baptismal records and marriage records in New Mexico that all of these various admixtures were represented here. So what we have to understand is that New Mexico was a frontier of colonial Mexico. We were on the edge of the Spanish Empire. So we didn't have all that intricate casta system here. The Pueblo Indians were called Pueblo. They were Pueblo in the documents, especially the baptismal records or the marriage records. However, you also had terms to designate those who were not Puebloan, like gente de razón. Again, people who had reasoning capacity, very paternal. But you see the term Español a lot. We have a census from 1750 and 1790. These census records show families listed as Español, but you also see mestizo a lot. You see coyote a lot. Obviously, you see indio, but you'll also see mulatto. That's represented in New Mexico. It's interesting, in the 1750 census, you see a lot of mulatto and mestizo, but by the 1790s, you see these people mixing, coming together. So it's a little bit more simplified. You see Español, mestizo, indio, but they're all the same people. There are also other Españoles coming up with names like Vasquez Borrego or Hinsoroni Tovar or Miera y Pacheco. We'll talk about him later. But essentially what you have are the same families mixing back and forth over the course of about 100 years, so that you get to a sense that there's a lot of intermarriage, but also a lot of outer marriage with Native Americans and mixed blood people marrying into the more, I guess we could use the term elite. I don't like that term, but you could say the people who are of a more European background. They're all mixing because there's no one else around. I tell people we descend definitely from the Spanish colonists that came here. We're definitely have a Spanish past. We have roots in Spain, but they run deep through colonial Mexico. But we're very fortunate that our ancestors had babies with the Native Americans, because we would be genetically in trouble if that had not happened, because there just weren't that many Spaniards here. When you compare with Guadalupe del Paso or Parral, or go into places like Zacatecas, there were a lot more Iberian Spaniards in those places, because they were wealthier, and there was a lot more economic energy there. But nonetheless, we were here developing and evolving as human beings, as an outpost of the Spanish Empire in colonial Mexico, Nuevo Mexico, La Provincia y Reino, the province and kingdom de Nuevo Mexico of New Mexico. So that's it. I'll talk more about this topic as we go along, because it doesn't go away. And I'll also talk later about Genizaros, a really unique element of the New Mexico population that develops in the 1700s. Hasta pronto. Bye.